The night was colder than usual, and the city lights seemed to flicker with an indifferent glow as if they too had grown tired of witnessing pain. On the sidewalk near the busy avenue, a young mother named Elena held the thin hands of her two little daughters, Sofia and Amara, only 4 and 5 years old. Their small faces were pale, their clothes worn, and though they tried to hide it, their stomachs had been empty since the day before. Elena had lost count of the days they had slept under bridges, in abandoned lots, or beneath cardboard shelters. Life had not just been hard, it had been merciless. But even in the depths of misery, Elena refused to let go of hope. She would whisper to her daughters every night, "We will rise again. Mommy promises." Her voice always trembled, but her heart never stopped believing. On that particular evening, as the three walked slowly down the street, the delicious smell of food drifted through the air. The aroma made the girls close their eyes for a moment, imagining plates full of warm meals. At the corner stood a luxurious restaurant, the kind where crystal lamps hung from the ceiling and musicians played soft melodies for people who had never known hunger. Through the huge glass windows, Elena could see families laughing, celebrating, and tasting dishes she couldn't even name. Her heart tightened. She had tried everything that day, collecting cans, asking for small donations, offering to clean car windows, but nothing had worked. And now, her daughter's steps were heavy. They were exhausted, weak, and trembling from hunger. At that moment, something inside Elena broke. Pride, fear, shame. None of it mattered anymore. Only her children mattered. She took a deep breath, and with hesitant steps, walked toward the restaurant's entrance. The warmth of the interior touched her skin as the door opened. A waiter turned immediately, his polished shoes clicking against the floor as he approached her with a forced smile. Before she could speak, Sofia tugged her hand gently, whispering, "Mommy, can we eat today?" Elena knelt down, kissed her daughters' foreheads, and stood again with determination. She faced the waiter and said, her voice trembling, "Please, do you have any expired food? Anything that was going to be thrown away? My daughters haven't eaten since yesterday." For a second, there was silence, a deep, heavy silence. Then the waiter laughed, not a small laugh, a loud, humiliating burst that made heads turn. He looked at Elena from head to toe, then at her daughters, and scoffed. "This is a luxury restaurant, not a garbage dump. People like you shouldn't even step in here." The humiliation hit her like a slap, but the pain became even sharper when the girls lowered their heads, ashamed. Tears welled in Elena's eyes, but she held them back. She refused to cry in front of him. The waiter shook his head with disgust and walked away, still laughing and whispering cruel comments to another employee, who joined in the mockery. The restaurant guests glanced briefly, then returned to their meals, pretending they had seen nothing. But someone had seen and heard everything. A man sitting alone at a table near the window slowly wiped his mouth with his napkin and watched the scene unfold with troubled eyes. His suit was elegant, his posture refined, and everything about him whispered wealth and influence. Yet, unlike the others, his expression wasn't one of annoyance or superiority. It was something else, something deeper, as if the entire moment had pulled him into a memory buried long ago. The instant Elena stepped out of that restaurant, holding her daughter's hands and lowering her head in resignation, the man's chair scraped softly against the floor. He rose, placed a generous tip on the table, and walked quickly toward the exit, his heart beating faster with every step. For reasons he couldn't yet explain, he felt compelled, almost called, to follow that young woman. And in that moment, without knowing it, Elena's life was about to change forever. The cold wind chased Elena and her daughters as they walked away from the restaurant. She tried to keep her posture firm, but her legs trembled. The humiliation still echoed in her ears, and the girl's silence cut her deeper than any insult. Sofia wiped her nose with the back of her hand, and Amara rubbed her little belly, hoping the pain would go away on its own. But hunger does not listen to hope. "Mommy, are we bad people?" Amara asked suddenly, her voice as fragile as a thread of silk. Elena stopped walking, her heart squeezed with a force that almost broke her. She knelt between them and held both girls close, her arms trembling as she whispered, "No, my angels, you are the best things in my life. People's cruelty says more about them than about us." She forced a smile, but the truth was hard. She had nothing left to give, not even a crumb. Behind them, a few meters away, the wealthy man watched silently. He didn't want to scare them, so he kept a respectful distance. But every word that little girl said hit him like a blow. He saw his own past reflected in their eyes, memories he had buried under years of success. The man's name was Alexander Moretti, one of the most influential and wealthy businessmen in the region. Newspapers loved to call him the man who turned dust into gold. But no one knew the truth. He had grown up in poverty, in a small, forgotten neighborhood, with a mother who also struggled day after day to feed him. He remembered nights when he had gone to sleep crying from hunger. He remembered begging for leftover food behind restaurants. And he remembered the same shame he now saw in Elena's eyes. It was unbearable. He stepped closer, carefully, and called out with a gentle voice, "Excuse me." Elena didn't turn at first. She thought it was someone coming to tell her to leave the area. But the voice wasn't harsh. It was warm. Curious and cautious, she turned around. Alexander approached slowly, his hands visible, his expression sincere. He looked at the girls, then at Elena. The streetlights cast a soft glow over them, and he could see how thin and exhausted they were. I heard what happened back there," he said softly, "and I am truly sorry for the way you were treated." Elena stiffened, embarrassed. She looked down and whispered, "It's not your fault, sir. We just needed something to eat, that's all." Sofia peeked shyly from behind her mother, and their eyes met Alexander's. Her innocence struck him deeply. Hunger should never live in a child's eyes. He breathed in deeply. "If you would allow me, I would like to help you." She shook her head immediately. "We're not beggars. I don't want charity. I just wanted a little food for them." "I know," he answered gently, "and you have every right to protect your dignity. But helping someone isn't charity, especially when it comes from someone who understands." Elena looked up, confused. There was something honest in his tone, something familiar in his sadness. Alexander continued, "I grew up starving. I know what it means to be turned away. I know the feeling of being treated as invisible." His voice cracked slightly at the memory. "Please, let me do something for you and your daughters. Not out of pity, but out of respect." Tears blurred Elena's vision. She didn't want to cry, yet her soul trembled with exhaustion. The girls clung to her dress, hungry and cold. Alexander took off his expensive coat and gently placed it around the girls' shoulders. "First, let's warm them," he said softly. "Then, let me take you somewhere safe to eat." Elena hesitated. She looked around, unsure, her heart torn between fear and desperation. "Why would you help us?" she whispered. Alexander's answer was simple. "Because someone once helped me, at a moment just like this, and it changed my entire life. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I would do the same for someone else." Elena's breath trembled. Her daughters looked at her with pleading eyes, the kind no mother can ignore. She nodded slowly, her voice breaking. "Okay, please, help us." Alexander smiled gently, and for the first time in years, Elena felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. And so, with the city lights shining above them, a moment of pure destiny unfolded. A rich man who remembered his past, a mother who refused to give up, and two little girls who, without knowing it, were about to have their lives transformed forever. "Come," Alexander said softly. "Tonight, everything changes." And he meant every word. Alexander led Elena and her daughters down the dimly lit street, away from the restaurant where humiliation had burned their hearts. The cold wind still bit at their faces, but under the protective shadow of his coat and the gentle words he whispered to the girls, the shivers slowly gave way to a sense of fragile hope. Elena walked carefully, her mind racing between disbelief and the overwhelming urge to trust this stranger, whose sincerity seemed impossible yet undeniable. Sofia and Amara clung to her tightly, their tiny hands clutching her skirt as though her presence alone could shield them from the cruelty of the world. Elena glanced at them and whispered, "Soon, soon, everything will be okay." Her voice trembled, not just with exhaustion, but with a mixture of fear and cautious hope she hadn't felt in years. They reached a car, a sleek black vehicle that gleamed under the streetlights. Alexander opened the rear door gently and knelt to meet the girls at eye level. "Hop in, little ones," he said softly. "Tonight, we're going somewhere warm, somewhere you can eat as much as you need." The girls hesitated, uncertain if this was real. Elena squeezed their hands. "It's okay, darlings. It's safe," she whispered, and slowly they climbed inside. As the car rolled through the city streets, Elena's mind wandered back to the countless nights she had spent on the pavement, trying to shield her daughters from the cold, from hunger, from the judgment of a world that didn't care. Memories of empty bellies, harsh words, the sting of neglect, and the relentless ache of hopelessness filled her eyes with tears. Alexander noticed her glances in the rearview mirror. "You've been carrying this alone for far too long," he said quietly, almost as if reading her thoughts. "No mother should ever have to fight the world with empty hands and a heavy heart. That's why I'm here." Elena wanted to believe him but was also cautious. "Why me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why now?" Alexander's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, and he glanced at the girls in the back seat. "Because sometimes the universe chooses its moments carefully. Sometimes the smallest acts, an insult, a glance, a refusal, lead to the most extraordinary changes. You and your daughters are meant for something greater, and tonight, it begins." The car pulled up to a grand estate, its gates open as if waiting for them. Warm lights spilled from the windows, and the scent of fresh food drifted into the cold night. Elena's heart nearly stopped. This was a place she had only seen from a distance in magazines, a world she had never imagined she would touch. And yet, here it was, an invitation, not to pity, but to life. Alexander led them inside, where a warm fire crackled in the grand hall. A chef placed bowls of steaming food before the girls, who immediately began eating, their small hands trembling with excitement and hunger. Elena sat beside them, her eyes wide as she watched the girls devour the meals she hadn't been able to provide for weeks. Tears slid down her face as Alexander finally spoke, quietly, almost reverently. "No one should ever go hungry, and no one should ever be humiliated for needing help. You deserve dignity, warmth, and hope." Elena choked back her tears, a trembling laugh escaping her lips. I don't know what to say. "Thank you. I don't even know how to—" Alexander placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to say anything. Actions will speak louder than words. And tonight, I'm going to show you that life can change, that even from the lowest point, miracles are possible." He paused and looked at the girls, who now smiled for the first time in weeks. "Sofia, Amara, do you know how special you are?" The girls shook their heads, cheeks flushed from warmth and the sudden feeling of safety. "You are brave," he said softly. "You survived cold nights, hunger, and fear. You kept your mother's hand, even when it was hard, and because of your courage, your lives are about to be filled with new hope." Elena felt her heart swell, the weight of despair lifting for the first time in years. Yet she also felt a quiet fear, the fear of losing this moment to disbelief, to doubt, to the cruel habit of life-breaking promises. Alexander seemed to sense her hesitation. "I know you've been hurt," he said. "I know life has been unfair. But sometimes, when people open their hearts to others, even strangers, they become the bridge to a new destiny. And tonight, this bridge is for you." He guided them to a private wing of the estate where warm beds awaited. "Rest here tonight," he said softly. "Tomorrow, we'll plan a future where hunger is not your companion, and dignity is never stolen from you again." Elena held her daughters close, whispering prayers she hadn't dared speak aloud for years. She felt the warmth of hope spread through her chest like sunlight through storm clouds, and in that quiet moment, she realized something she hadn't believed possible, that even in the depths of despair, kindness exists, that even after humiliation, miracles can arrive, and that sometimes, life saves the most extraordinary gifts for those who never give up, even when the world has turned its back. Outside, the city buzzed and moved on, unaware of the quiet miracle that had unfolded. But inside the walls of that grand home, a mother and her daughters felt the first true taste of safety, warmth, and love. And Alexander, watching them settle, knew that this night was just the beginning. The true change, the life-altering, soul-healing transformation, was only beginning to unfold. For Elena, Sofia, and Amara, a new chapter had begun, and it would be more extraordinary than they had ever dared to imagine. The night inside the estate felt like a dream to Elena. The warmth from the fire wrapped around her, thin frame like a protective embrace, and the gentle hum of quiet conversations from the staff, and Alexander filled the room with a soothing rhythm. For the first time in months, the fear that had clung to her chest seemed to loosen, replaced by a fragile thread of hope she dared to grasp. Her daughters, Sofia and Amara, nestled against her, their small bodies warm and safe, no longer trembling from hunger or cold. Alexander watched them with a careful distance at first, observing the way Elena's fingers instinctively smoothed the girl's hair, the way she whispered soft reassurances even as her own eyes glistened with unshed tears. There was a strength in her, an unyielding determination to protect her children, that struck him more profoundly than any act of wealth or influence he had ever witnessed. In that moment, he realized that this young mother, despite her suffering, was already extraordinary, and extraordinary people deserved a chance to flourish. "Tonight, Alexander, you," began, his voice low but steady, "is not just about food or warmth. It's about giving you the space to see that your life can change, that nothing, not even despair, is permanent when someone cares enough to act." Elena's eyes met his, searching for sincerity. There was no judgment, no pity in his gaze, only understanding. She began, but her voice faltered, overwhelmed by emotions she had buried for years. She swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say. I've never imagined." Alexander shook his head gently. "You don't need to say anything. Tonight, words aren't necessary. Actions will speak for us." He gestured around the room, to the tables laden with food, the soft blankets, the small toys he had provided for the girls. "Everything you see here is to remind you that life is capable of kindness, even when it seems impossible. Even when the world has turned its back on you, there are people and moments ready to restore hope." Sofia's eyes widened as she picked up a small, plush toy that had been placed beside her plate. "Mommy, it's for me?" she asked softly, barely daring to touch it. "Yes, darling," Elena whispered, holding her close. "It's yours. Everything here is for us." Amara, not wanting to be left out, clutched a soft blanket, pressing it against her chest. The warmth of the moment, combined with the simple comfort of touch and the certainty of safety, made tears stream down Elena's face. But these were not tears of despair. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and the quiet astonishment of having her family seen, acknowledged, and protected. Alexander knelt to speak to them directly, his voice gentle but full of conviction. "You two are brave girls, braver than you realize. You've survived nights no child should endure. You've seen hunger, fear, and rejection, and yet you've never stopped trusting your mother. That courage, that love, it is what makes this moment possible." Elena's chest swelled, but with it came a quiet fear. "I don't want them to hope too much," she whispered to herself. "Life always takes it away. I can't let them be disappointed again." Alexander's eyes softened. "Hope is not dangerous. Hope is life, and right now, hope is what you deserve. It's the beginning of a new chapter, not a promise that the world won't hurt you, but a promise that you will no longer face it alone." He stood and walked toward the girls' table, picking up 2 bowls of warm soup. "Eat slowly," he said. "Taste every bite. Feel the warmth. Let your bodies and hearts remember what it's like to be safe, to be nourished, to be cared for." The girls ate carefully at first, shyly, as if any sense of abundance might vanish if they indulged too quickly. Elena watched them, marveling at how their tiny hands moved over the food, as if discovering a new world. And in that moment, she felt the first real weight of hope in her heart, a feeling she had thought was gone forever. After the meal, Alexander guided Elena to a small room prepared for her. There was a comfortable bed, fresh sheets, and a few small toys left for the girls. "Rest," he said gently. "Tonight you are safe. Tomorrow we begin planning how to build a future that honors your courage and your love." Elena lay on the bed, holding her daughters close. She felt the warmth of the blankets seep into her bones, but more than that, she felt the warmth of care, human kindness that she had almost forgotten existed. She whispered prayers softly, words she had almost stopped speaking, thanking the universe, God, fate, anything that had sent this man into their lives at precisely the right moment. Outside the room, Alexander sat quietly in the hallway, reflecting on the day. He had seen poverty, suffering, and humiliation countless times, but rarely had he been struck so deeply. There was a purity in Elena's love for her children, a resilience that transcended circumstance, that even wealth could not buy. It demanded respect, action, and protection, and he had acted. Hours passed, and sleep eventually overcame exhaustion. Elena dreamed not of cold streets or hunger, but of a world where she and her daughters could live with dignity, joy, and safety. She dreamed of laughter replacing tears, of meals shared without fear, of days filled with warmth and love. When morning came, sunlight streamed into the room, and Elena awoke to find her daughter still asleep, curled against her. She felt something she had not felt in years, a sense of possibility, not a guarantee, not a fairy tale, but a chance, a real, tangible chance at a better life. And Alexander, watching from the next room, smiled quietly. Because tonight, he had not just provided food or warmth, he had reignited the spark of hope in a family that had nearly been extinguished by despair. It was the first step of a journey that would change everything. And although Elena did not yet know it, the humiliation, hunger, and despair of the past were about to give way to a future brighter than she had ever imagined, filled with opportunities she had only dared to dream about in the deepest recesses of her heart. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe, and that belief, fragile, trembling, and yet unstoppable, would become the foundation of the incredible transformation about to unfold. Papa Leone rivela: ecco cosa succede all'anima del tuo caro defunto quando celebri la messa il settimo giorno. Non farlo. The following days unfolded like a dream Elena had never allowed herself to imagine. Each morning, sunlight poured into the rooms of the estate, illuminating corners she had only ever seen in her imagination, and casting long shadows that seemed to whisper promises of hope and renewal. Elena and her daughters moved through the halls, their steps careful at first, unsure if this world of warmth, safety, and abundance was real, or if it would vanish as suddenly as it had appeared. Alexander guided them through each day with a quiet patience, knowing that trust had to be built slowly. He introduced them to staff members who were kind, attentive, and respectful, people who understood the delicate nature of their past suffering. Every gesture, from the simple offering of tea to the careful arrangement of toys for the girls, was infused with the intention to show Elena that dignity could be restored, that love and kindness were not illusions, and that life, when touched by compassion, could become extraordinary. The girls began to laugh again, soft, hesitant giggles that grew bolder with each passing day. Elena watched them, her chest swelling with emotions she had long buried under the weight of fear and hunger. Every smile was a small miracle, a testament to their resilience and innocence, and yet she could not fully let herself believe. Years of hardship had carved a deep skepticism into her heart, and she feared that this sudden turn of fortune might disappear, leaving them shattered once more. Alexander noticed her hesitation. "You don't have to understand everything now," he said gently, his voice calm but imbued with the gravity of someone who had seen suffering and knew the delicate nature of hope. "The important thing is to allow yourself to feel, to trust, even if it is terrifying. The world will not always break you. Sometimes, it can lift you higher than you ever imagined." Days turned into weeks. Elena began to learn that survival was not just about enduring pain, but about embracing possibility. She helped the girls with small lessons, teaching them numbers, letters, and the simplest life skills, but always with love and patience. Alexander provided guidance, but he allowed her to feel the authority of her role as a mother, a role that had been diminished by poverty, by hunger, and by society's cruel indifference. Slowly, Elena reclaimed a sense of power and self-worth she had thought lost forever. Yet even in this newfound sanctuary, shadows of the past lingered. Elena often awoke in the night, haunted by memories of cold streets, the biting wind, and the derisive laughter that had marked the lowest points of her life. Her daughters sometimes shivered in their sleep, murmuring fragments of dreams that recalled hunger and fear. Elena would hold them close, whispering assurances that were not just words, but the thread connecting the past to a new, brighter reality. One afternoon, Alexander called Elena into his private study. He was seated behind a large oak desk, a look of both resolve and deep care on his face. "Elena," he began, "I know that these days have been overwhelming. You have seen kindness, warmth, and hope in ways you never thought possible. But there is something you must understand, something more important than comfort or security alone. Life has more for you than just shelter and food." Elena listened, her heart beating faster, a mixture of curiosity and fear coursing through her veins. What is it?" she asked softly. Alexander rose and walked slowly toward the large window overlooking the estate gardens. The sunlight caught the edges of his suit, creating a halo of warmth that seemed almost symbolic. "You have been tested by the world," he said, "in ways that most people cannot imagine. And yet, you have survived. Not just survived, but loved fiercely, protected your daughters, and refused to surrender your humanity. That strength, that love, is rare, and it deserves to be honored in ways beyond mere comfort." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. I don't understand. I don't know what you mean." Alexander turned to her, eyes steady and unwavering. "In time, you will understand. But first, you must continue to trust, to believe in the unseen, and to embrace the possibility of change. There is a journey ahead for you, one that will challenge your courage, your faith, and your very understanding of what life can offer. And it is a journey your daughters will take alongside you." For the first time, Elena felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The future seemed vast, almost overwhelming, yet it carried a promise she had never known, a promise that whispered, the world had more in store than suffering and hunger. It had wonders, opportunities, and transformations that were unimaginable to those who had never dared to hope. Alexander guided them through the estate's vast library, filled with books, maps, and artifacts from around the world. He encouraged Elena to explore, to read, and to learn. "Knowledge," he said softly, "is another form of freedom. It allows you to see beyond the walls that have confined you, to imagine possibilities that were previously invisible, and when your mind opens, your life can follow." Elena began to study with a fervor she had never felt before. She read to her daughters, teaching them to see beyond immediate hunger and fear. She began to dream in ways that were bold, expansive, and new. Yet, deep within her, a quiet tension remained. She feared that the good she had been shown might be temporary, that life's cruel lessons would return, stronger than before. But Alexander's presence, calm and steady, reminded her that change required trust. He did not rush her, nor did he demand immediate belief. Instead, he allowed her to grow, to witness small miracles in her daughters' laughter, in their curiosity, and in the moments when Elena herself felt the spark of possibility rekindled within her soul. Evenings became a time of quiet reflection. Elena would sit by the fire with her daughters, listening to their stories, their imaginings of a future without hunger or fear. Alexander would sometimes join them, sharing his own experiences, not as a wealthy man flaunting success, but as someone who had walked a path of hardship and who understood the preciousness of compassion. And in the quiet of those nights, Elena felt something she had not felt in years, a sense of profound gratitude, intertwined with awe. Life had given her a second chance, one she did not fully comprehend but felt with every heartbeat. And although the climax of her journey, the full revelation of how deeply her life would be transformed, had not yet come, she could sense that something monumental was approaching, something that would forever change the trajectory of her family's lives. She did not yet know the full extent of the miracle awaiting them. She did not yet know how their struggles, suffering, and resilience would converge into a moment so powerful, so profound, that the world she had known, harsh, cold, unforgiving, would be completely reshaped. But she could feel it, deep in her soul, and with each heartbeat, with each soft laugh from Sofia and Amara, with each whispered reassurance that life could indeed be beautiful, Elena's heart dared to hope that the ultimate turning point, the one that would define the rest of their lives, was near. Outside, the city continued, unaware of the quiet transformation taking place within the walls of the estate. But inside, a mother and her daughters, guided by a man who had once been just another observer of human suffering, were standing at the threshold of a life-altering miracle, a moment that would arrive with such power that nothing would ever be the same again. And though the final revelation had not yet come, Elena knew one undeniable truth: the world had opened a door for them, a door that, once crossed, would lead to a future brighter, safer, and more filled with love than anything she had dared to imagine. In her darkest nights, the morning sun broke through the horizon with a brilliance that seemed almost symbolic, casting its golden rays across the estate gardens, where Elena and her daughters played freely for the first time in months. The air was warm, the scent of blooming flowers mingling with the gentle sounds of birdsong. Elena could hardly believe this world was real, so full of life, beauty, and safety. But the truth was undeniable. Their lives had changed forever. Alexander had orchestrated more than a refuge. He had crafted a foundation for transformation. Not just food and shelter, but education, mentorship, and an unshakable support system for Elena and her daughters. They had begun to explore possibilities Elena had never dreamed of, enrolling the girls in a school where they could learn freely, introducing Elena to networks that could help her build a career, and providing opportunities to develop skills she had never imagined she could possess. That morning, Elena sat with her daughters under the shade of a blooming magnolia tree. Sofia and Amara were laughing, chasing butterflies, their small voices ringing like music that healed old wounds. Elena held their hands, feeling the warmth and joy of a life that had seemed impossible mere weeks ago. She thought of the nights on the streets, the gnawing hunger, the humiliation of the restaurant, and the desperation that had driven her to that door. Every memory was a sharp contrast to the peace and abundance surrounding her now. Alexander approached quietly, carrying a basket of fruit. He handed it to Elena, smiling gently. "I think this is a good day for a picnic," he said. "A day to celebrate courage, resilience, and love." Elena looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You've given us everything." Alexander shook his head. "I've given you nothing you didn't already earn," he replied. "Everything I've done is because you've carried strength, love, and courage in your hearts. You survived, you protected your daughters, and you never gave up. That is what created this miracle." As they sat together, the girls devouring fresh fruit and Elena savoring the moment, Alexander revealed the final piece of the transformation. He had arranged for a small but meaningful home for them within the estate, a cozy, beautiful space where they could live independently but safely, with full access to resources, tutors, and care. Elena could finally rest, knowing her daughters would grow up without fear, hunger, or shame. Weeks turned into months. Elena learned new skills, developing a confidence that grew stronger with each passing day. She discovered talents she had long forgotten, and with Alexander's guidance, began building a path for herself and her daughters that was sustainable and empowering. Sofia and Amara thrived in their new school, their laughter and curiosity endless. Elena could watch them grow without the constant anxiety that had dominated every day of their past lives. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Elena sat on the terrace with Alexander. The girls were playing nearby, their voices full of life. Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them here, the nights of hunger, the cold streets, the humiliation, and finally, the act of compassion that had changed everything. "I still can't believe it," she said softly. I thought life had nothing for us, that we were invisible, forgotten, and yet, here we are." Alexander smiled, a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "The world can be cruel, Elena, but it can also be miraculous. You just had to be brave enough to let it touch you." Elena took a deep breath, the weight of years of suffering finally lifting from her shoulders. She realized something profound. The hardships had forged a resilience and love that had allowed her to recognize and embrace this miracle. Her life, and the lives of her daughters, were not defined by poverty or despair, but by the courage to keep moving forward, the willingness to protect those she loved, and the openness to accept kindness when it appeared. The girls ran back to her, their faces glowing with happiness, and Elena held them close, feeling their small hearts beat against hers. In that moment the world seemed infinite, full of endless possibility. She understood now that life's true miracles were not merely in wealth or comfort, but in love, in hope, and in the courage to survive against all odds. Alexander watched silently, knowing that the most profound change had not been the food, the beds, or the estate. It had been the restoration of dignity, hope, and belief in the goodness of life. Elena's journey had turned despair into possibility, fear into courage, and hunger into abundance, not just of food, but of love, opportunity, and purpose. As the night fell, Elena tucked her daughters into bed, kissed their foreheads, and whispered a prayer she had not dared speak in years, one of gratitude, hope, and recognition of the miracle that had arrived when they needed it most. She understood fully that life could rise from the ashes, that courage and love could summon the unimaginable, and that even in the darkest moments, a single act of compassion could change everything. For Elena, Sofia, and Amara, the world had transformed completely. The streets that once represented fear, hunger, and despair were now distant memories. In their place was a life filled with warmth, safety, love, and endless possibilities. And as they drifted to sleep that night, wrapped in the security of a life rebuilt with courage and compassion, Elena realized the ultimate truth. Miracles were real, not because the world owed them anything, but because love, bravery, and faith in humanity had the power to change lives forever. And in that realization, Elena smiled for the first time without reservation, knowing that she had been given not only a second chance, but a life that could now be beautiful, meaningful, and full of hope. A life that she and her daughters had truly earned.